The teller's name was Marcus. I know that because I'd been walking into that Wells Fargo on Riverside Boulevard for 9 years, and Marcus had been behind that counter for 6 of them. A patient young man with a quiet laugh, the kind who remembered you liked your bills in 20s and never made you feel rushed. He asked about my wife by name for almost a year after she passed, and I never forgot that. On a Tuesday morning in November, I walked through those glass doors in Sacramento at 2:40 in the morning, stepped up to his window, and asked to withdraw $2,500 from my checking account. Marcus smiled. He asked for my ID. I handed it over. He typed. He looked at the screen, and then he went still. Not the ordinary stillness of a man processing a routine transaction. The specific stillness of someone whose eyes have landed on a number that his training is now telling him to handle very, very carefully. He looked at that screen a beat too long. Then he looked up at me, and his face was working hard at neutral and not quite getting there. He said, "Mr. Delgado, could you give me just one moment?" He picked up his desk phone. He turned halfway away from me and spoke low enough that I couldn't make out the words. He hung up and looked back at me. "Someone's going to come talk to you real quick, if that's all right." I said, "Marcus, what's going on?" He said, "I'm gonna have Miss Okafor step out. She's our branch manager. Just give her 1 second." He said my name twice inside of a minute. That's what people do when they're trying to make a hard moment feel soft. I'd spent 31 years running heavy equipment for the county foreman, the last 14 of them, and I'd delivered enough bad news to enough crews to know exactly what it looks like when somebody's steering you toward a conversation you're not gonna like. So, I stepped to the side of the counter, and I waited. The lobby was doing its ordinary Tuesday business around me. A guy in scrubs at the next window, a kid on the floor by the little rope stand, playing with a toy truck while his mama filled out a slip. Ordinary morning, moving along like ordinary mornings do. Then a door opened off to the side, and a woman in her 40s, sharp navy blazer, reading glasses pushed up into her braids, came walking toward me with the face of somebody who's been told exactly how to look right now. She put her hand out. "Mr. Delgado, I'm Adaze Okafor. I manage this branch. Would you mind stepping back to my office for a minute?" I told her, of course. Followed her down a short hall into a corner office. Window looking out over the parking lot. 2 monitors on the desk, and a chair set across from it, positioned for precisely this kind of talk. She shut the door, sat down, turned one of those monitors toward me slow, careful, like a woman who'd already decided exactly how she was going to say what came next. She said, "Mr. Delgado, I want to show you something before I tell you anything." She said at 7:52 that morning, somebody had walked into that branch and made a cash withdrawal off my account. Full balance. $18,910. She let that number sit there in the room a second. She said the withdrawal came with a signed slip, and the signature on it looked like mine. She said their system had flagged it as an anomaly, and she'd pulled the security footage from 7:52 to look at it herself before she said one word to me. She clicked her mouse. The monitor lit up with a camera feed from above the windows. Timestamp burned into the corner. Clear picture, clearer than you'd expect, this being a newer branch with newer cameras. The person standing at that window was a man. Tall, heavy set through the shoulders, ball cap pulled low, but not so low I couldn't see the tattoo running up the side of his neck. I knew that tattoo. I'd watched it get inked, sitting in a shop in Elk Grove 4 years back, holding my daughter's hand while she held her boyfriend's other hand and told me it didn't hurt that bad. I looked at that screen a long time. Long enough that Adaze, to her credit, didn't say a word, didn't move, just let the silence sit there, the way silence needs to sometimes. Finally I said, real quiet, "That's Tyrell. That's my daughter's boyfriend." She said, "Yes, sir. That's what we suspected too, given whose ID he used." I said, "He's not on that account. Never has been." She said, "No, sir. Account's yours alone." The slip's got what looks like a forged signature on it. We put a fraud hold the second it flagged, which means those funds haven't cleared. They're frozen where they sit. Frozen. I sat with that word a second. Sat with everything underneath it, everything I'd already understood was coming, because for 3 weeks I'd been building toward this exact conversation. I said, "Adaze, I appreciate how careful you're being with me. I need to ask you one thing. Is the money still sitting in that account? She said the cash had already gone out the door, but the fraud hold meant it couldn't be moved or deposited anywhere else. It was frozen in the sense that mattered, pending the investigation. And if I filed a police report today, they could start the formal recovery. I told her I'd need copies of everything, the transaction record, the withdrawal slip, a still from the camera. She said she'd have it within the hour. I thanked her, sat back in that chair, and looked at the frozen picture on her screen. My daughter's boyfriend, at my bank, at 7:52 in the morning, while I was home pouring my coffee, with absolutely no idea what he was doing across town. But here's the thing, neither one of them knew. Here's the part that turns this whole story on its head. What Terrell Boyd didn't know, walking into that Wells Fargo at 7:52 on a Tuesday morning, was that 4 weeks earlier, I'd already moved every dollar of my real savings clean out of that bank and into a different one entirely. That $18,910 sitting in my checking account wasn't my money. Not really, not anymore. It was bait. The exact amount I'd decided I could stand to lose, if that's what it took to prove what I already knew was happening. Because I did know. I'd known for a month, and I'd spent that whole month getting ready for this Tuesday. My name's Earl Delgado. I'm 64 years old, I live in Sacramento, California, and what brought me to that chair in Ades Okafor's office cost me damn near 19 grand in frozen funds and 31 years of a foreman's habit of writing everything down, and the particular clear-eyed patience of a man who's spent his whole working life learning that people show you who they are eventually. You just gotta be paying attention when they do it. My daughter had gotten herself tangled up with a man who figured that because I was older and grieving and slower these days than I used to be, I wasn't watching close. Baby girl, I'm always watching close. This is a true story, and if you're joining me, go on and drop the city you're listening from down in the comments. I read every single one of them. All right, let's get into it. I spent 31 years working for Sacramento County Public Works. Started out on a paving crew straight out of the Army, worked my way up through every machine they had until I was running crews of my own, 20-some men and women, some of the biggest infrastructure jobs this county's done in the last 2 decades. Retired in the spring of 2022 with a pension I'd earned every nickel of and a knee that told me every morning exactly how many years I'd spent on concrete. My wife Loretta used to say I became a foreman because I was too stubborn to take instructions from anybody who hadn't earned the right to give them, and she'd say it with a look on her face she saved for things that were both true and a little bit mean, which is the best kind of true there is. Loretta Delgado, born Loretta Mae Simmons in Vallejo in 1958, was the most decent human being I have ever known, and I mean decent the way you mean it about people who actually live it instead of just talking about it. She spent 24 years as a nurse at Kaiser, mostly in the pediatric ward, and she brought home the same patients with our own 2 kids that she brought to every sick child that came through those doors. She kept a rose garden along the side fence of our place off Fruit Ridge Road that she babied from the first warm day in April clean through Halloween, and I never did understand how a woman learns which roses want shade and which want sun straight through, and which ones you just gotta leave alone and let sulk for a season. Loretta knew all of it, wrote it all down too, same as she wrote everything down. After she passed, I found those notebooks in a shoebox in the garage, and I stood there in that garage holding them for longer than I want to admit to you. Loretta died of a stroke in July of last year. 66 years old, no warning, nothing in her history that said this was coming. She was fine on a Sunday, and she was gone by Monday morning, and that's the kind of loss that doesn't give you one single day to get ready for it. And I'm not going to sit here and describe what those first weeks were like because that's mine. That belongs to me. And it wouldn't do a thing for this story anyhow. What'll do something for this story is this. Loretta passed in July, and by September, which is to say about 8 weeks after I buried my wife, my daughter Simone had asked me 3 separate times how my will was looking, and whether I'd thought about getting things in order. I had 2 kids. My son Marcus, different Marcus, funny enough, not the teller, is 36, lives up in Portland, works as a physical therapist, calls me every single Thursday night and most Sunday mornings, and drove down to Sacramento twice in the month after his mother's funeral without me having to ask him one time. He's got his mother's decency, and he's also told me quiet, no accusation in his voice, twice this past year, that he was worried about his sister and thought I ought to keep my eyes open. I heard him. I didn't move fast enough on what I heard. Simone Delgado is 34, lives in Elk Grove with Tyrell Boyd, her boyfriend of about 3 years, and her little girl from a marriage that didn't take. Tyrell does something with used cars, buys and flips them, and he's got the particular way about him of a man who's calculated exactly how much charm a room requires and delivers precisely that much and not one drop more. Firm handshake. Remembers what team you root for. Asks the right question at a cookout. In 3 years of him being around my table, I never once heard that man say a single unplanned thing in front of me. Simone is my daughter, and I love her the way you love a child who's made some choices you wouldn't have made and turned into somebody a little harder to be around than you were hoping for. She's sharp, she's capable, and both of those things have been pointed in a direction I'd noticed for a couple years now and kept refusing to say out loud. Because she's my daughter, and because Loretta always used to say Simone would find her footing eventually, and I deferred to Loretta's read on people most of the time. Because Loretta's read on people was usually right. Loretta was gone now, and Simone had started in on the estate inside of 2 months. The questions came dressed up nice, genuine-sounding concern in her voice. She mentioned a coworker whose father died without a proper will, and what a mess that turned into for the family. She mentioned Tyrell knew a guy who did estate stuff on the side, and would be glad to look over any paperwork if it had helped me out. She brought up, kind of offhand, that the house on Fruit Ridge was probably worth a real lot in this market these days, and maybe it was smart to understand the tax side of things before anybody made a move. The house on Fruit Ridge. The tax side of things. I wrote every one of those conversations down in a work notebook, dated and summed up, same as I wrote down every safety incident and every crew dispute for 31 years, because that's not a habit I chose. Foreman, that's just the job. And the job doesn't leave you when you retire from it. By November, Simone was asking about my online banking. Said she was worried about me handling it alone. Said Tyrell had helped set up bill pay for his own mother and it had made her whole life easier. Said she could get it squared away for me if I just gave her my login. I told her I'd been banking online for 9 years without help and I figured I'd manage. She said she just wanted to help her old man out. I told her I appreciated that. I wrote it down. In January, I came home from the hardware store and found Simone in my den. She had a reason, said she was hunting for a photograph out of one of Loretta's boxes she thought might be in there. Reasonable enough, Loretta had boxes everywhere in that house. But when I walked in, Simone wasn't over by the closet. She was sitting at my desk, and she shut my laptop before I'd fully clocked that it had been open. I didn't say a word in the moment. Wrote it down after she left. Spent the following week going through every account I had, with the same kind of attention I used to give a job site after somebody got hurt on it. Every statement, every login, everything. I found 2 things. First, my checking account had been logged into from an IP address out of Elk Grove at 3:14 in the morning on a night in December. Session lasted 6 minutes. No transactions made, just a look. Somebody with my credentials. Somebody living in Elk Grove. Second thing, there was an inquiry on my credit report. I hadn't made a pre-qualification pull for a home equity line against the Fruit Ridge property, submitted online in my name back in November. Never went through, on account of the credit freeze I'd kept on my file for years out of plain old habit. But the inquiry sat there. November. Right when Simone had started asking about the house and the taxes on it. I sat at my kitchen table a long while looking at those 2 things. 31 years running crews teaches you what a pattern looks like when the story people are telling you doesn't match the numbers underneath it. I'd been sitting on this particular pattern a good while, filing it away in that drawer where you keep things you're not ready to call by their true name yet. I decided I was ready. Next morning I called an attorney, a woman named Priya Anand, 55 years old, handled elder law and estate disputes out of an office above a dry cleaner's on J Street, which I mentioned because what's above and below an office tells you plenty about what kind of practice it is, and hers wasn't fancy, it was working, and I've always had more respect for working than fancy. A buddy of mine from the county, a guy I'd known 30 years, had sent 2 people her way over estate troubles, and described her the particular way. One working man describes another professional he trusts. Thorough. Doesn't like surprises. Me either. I walked into her office on a Monday at 9 a.m. with my work notebook, a printed page of what I'd found, and a copy of my will, drafted back in 2018 and never touched since Loretta passed. Priya went through all of it without a word, the way the good ones do, straight through, no performance about it. When she finished, she set it down and looked at me square. She said, "Mr. Delgado, I'm going to ask you a direct question. Based on what you've got documented here, do you believe your daughter is working toward taking action against your estate?" I said I believed she already was. The credit pull and the account access weren't coincidence. That's reconnaissance, plain and simple. She asked about my son. I said Marcus had warned me twice this year and wasn't involved in whatever his sister had going on. I was sure of that. She asked what outcome I wanted. I said I want my estate going where I decide it goes. I want Simone to understand I knew what she was up to before she got far enough to do real damage. And I want a record. Because I ran crews for 31 years, and the record is the only thing that ever settles an argument for good. Priya looked at me a second, said those were all things we could get done, said let's talk structure. What Priya laid out, and what I got done over the next 4 weeks, with the kind of speed and precision 3 decades of running a crew teaches a man, was this. I broke apart the old joint documents that still had Loretta listed on 2 accounts. I set up a revocable living trust, the Earl J. Delgado Family Trust, named Marcus successor trustee and sole beneficiary of the house. Moved the Fruit Ridge property into that trust. Opened a new account entirely, over at a credit union clear across town, and moved every dollar of my real money there. Left the Wells Fargo checking account open. Left it sitting at $18,910. Left it open because I understood, cold and clear, the way you look at a set of books that don't add up, that Simone had my login and had been watching that balance. If I closed it out of nowhere, she'd know something changed, and she'd shift her plan. If I left it sitting there looking like my regular operating money, she'd see exactly what she was hunting for. I also called Wells Fargo's fraud line direct, and got connected to a compliance officer, a woman named Denise Whitfield. Told her what I'd found, and what I expected was coming. Gave her the account number, told her exactly what to watch for, asked her to flag it for enhanced monitoring, and call me the second anything moved on it. Denise told me in 18 years of compliance work, she'd maybe fielded 3 calls like mine. I asked how those turned out. She said, favorably, for the people who made the call. I said, good, that's exactly what I need. 4 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, I drove over to that branch to make a routine withdrawal, and Marcus went still at his window. I filed the police report that same afternoon at the Sacramento PD substation on Franklin Boulevard. Officer who took it, young guy named Reyes, wrote everything down careful, told me, given the dollar amount and the evidence I had, this was going straight to their financial crimes unit. He took the security still 8 days had printed for me, the withdrawal slip with the forged signature, the full transaction record. The detective assigned was a woman named Carla Whitmore, mid-50s, sharp and no-nonsense, called me the following Wednesday and asked me to come in with everything. I brought it all the notebook with 16 months of dated entries, the printed login records showing that December IP address out of Elk Grove, the credit report with the November inquiry, the summary of my whole restructuring, and one more document I'd put together over a weekend at my kitchen table, a full timeline of every money and estate conversation Simone and I had. From August of last year through this November, dated, summarized, matched up against my calendar. Detective Whitmore looked at that timeline a long while. She said, "Mr. Delgado, you built this yourself?" I told her 31 years running a crew. You don't wait till you need documentation to start keeping it. You keep it as a matter of course, every day, whether you need it yet or not. She asked about the December login. I told her the bank's compliance department confirmed the anomaly and traced the IP once I'd flagged it for them. She sat quiet a second, then said, "Mr. Delgado, between the footage, the forged signature, the credit pull, and your own documentation of the account access, you've built yourself a pretty complete case." I told her that was the intention. She asked why I hadn't come to them back in December when I first found that login. I told her back in December I had an anomaly. An anomaly isn't a case. A case is what I had by November, with the footage and the forged signature and the whole timeline laid end to end. I needed the full shape of it before I moved. She looked at me steady and said they'd open the investigation. She'd be in touch inside the week. I called Marcus, my son, from the parking lot outside that police substation. He picked up on the second ring. I told him everything. The bank, Adai's, the footage, the report. Told him about the December login and the November credit pull, and the month I'd spent moving everything I owned. Told him the whole thing in the order it happened, and he stayed quiet through all of it. The particular way he goes quiet when he's actually listening, instead of just waiting his turn to talk. When I finished, he said, "Dad, how long you known?" I told him I'd been building the file since January. Knew what it was since then. Didn't want to say anything till I had it confirmed. Didn't want him carrying something he couldn't do a thing about. He was quiet another second. Then he said, "You all right?" I told him I was clear. Clear's what's available to me right now. He asked, did I want him to come down? I told him, not yet. Wait till I knew the investigation timeline. There'd be a moment I'd need him here, and I'd tell him when it came. Then he said, for what it's worth, Mom would have caught this a year ago. I told him I know. She was always faster than me on people. I'm better with numbers. People take me longer. He said, you figured it out anyway. I said, I did. Drove home to Fruit Ridge Road after that. Sat out on the back patio in the November light and looked at Loretta's rose garden, which had started going wild the way a garden goes wild once the person who understood it is gone. Still had good bones to it. She'd built it that way on purpose. But the fine points of it were blurring out at the edges, and I didn't have the knowledge to hold it together. I thought about those notebooks in the garage, went and got them. Sat out there and read through them for the better part of an hour, following her handwriting through 3 seasons of a garden she wasn't going to see bloom again. Understood, for the first time with any real clarity, what she'd been growing back there, and why, and what each one of them needed from me now. The investigation ran about 10 weeks. Detective Whitmore called me 3 times, and an assistant DA named Frank Osei once, methodical fella, went over my documentation with the kind of attention it deserved. What they found was this. Between August and November, Simone had gotten into my online banking through the laptop in my den that January visit, confirmed by the digital session logs. She'd used that access to track my balances for close to 7 months. She'd submitted the November home equity pull, blocked cold by my credit freeze. She'd forged my signature on the withdrawal slip and had Tyrell present it at the Wells Fargo branch, where Marcus's training had triggered the exact protocol it was built to trigger. Forensics on Tyrell's phone, under the warrant Detective Whitmore pulled, turned up a notes app where Simone had been keeping a running log of my balance for 8 straight months. Last entry was made that Tuesday morning at 7:31, 21 minutes before Tyrell walked through those doors. It read, Dad's account, $18,910 this morning. Send T now before he checks it. She'd been watching and waiting. Picked a Tuesday. She figured I had no reason to be anywhere near that bank. She didn't know I'd put that exact appointment in my own calendar 4 weeks earlier. Didn't know I'd asked Adeze to call me the second anything moved on that account. Didn't know about Denise Whitfield in compliance, or the enhanced flag, or the credit union account holding what that Wells Fargo account only looked like it held. She'd spent 8 months watching a number on a screen, and sent a man to go take it, and neither one of them knew the building was already waiting on them. Tyrell, once the digital record of his texts with Simone surfaced, hired his own lawyer separate from hers, and gave a statement calling his part limited. Said he was concerned about how things had gone in a direction he hadn't fully anticipated. Detective Whitmore told me about that statement with the dry, particular patience of a woman who's heard limited involvement plenty of times before and has settled opinions about what it's usually worth. Simone was charged in February with grand theft, forgery, and identity theft. Charges backed by the footage, the forensic account access, the phone records, and that 731 Notes app entry. Her lawyer entered a not guilty plea. Case got set for trial in the summer. She didn't reach out to me between that Tuesday at the bank and the February charges. I didn't reach out to her either. Marcus called every Thursday and Sunday, same as always, and we talked about his patients and the roses, and whatever book I had going, and Sacramento politics, which is its own particular mess most seasons. We didn't talk about Simone on most of those calls, on account of there wasn't anything useful left to add to what was already moving on its own. I went to see Priya in March, once charges were filed, to make sure the trust was sitting clean. She went through everything and told me it was airtight, said the criminal case wouldn't touch it, the house and my real money were fully protected. I asked her about the 18,000. She said the recovery process was underway through the bank, and given the frozen status and the strength of the evidence, Wells Fargo had indicated they expected to make me whole. Might take a few months, but it was recoverable. I told her I knew. Told her I'd left that money sitting there fully, willing to lose it if that's what the case needed. Didn't expect to see it again. That I likely would was a better outcome than the one I'd planned around. Priya looked at me a second and said most folks in my position don't think about it that way. I told her most folks in my position didn't spend 31 years running a county crew. She almost smiled at that. Simone took a plea in June. Full restitution, suspended sentence, 5 years probation, permanent mark on her record. Frank Osei called me after and said it was the strongest resolution the evidence supported. I told him I understood and I appreciated the work he'd put in. Restitution came through in August. I put it straight into the credit union account and logged the date in my notebook, same as I log everything. Then I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee and sat with the fact that it was over, which is a whole different kind of sitting than sitting in the middle of something. Takes a whole different kind of time to get through. Marcus drove down from Portland the weekend after the plea came through. We sat out back that Saturday, and he helped me figure out one of the roses along the fence I'd never been able to place from the notebook description alone. He knew it because his mother had told him about it once, years back, and he'd remembered. Said she planted that one on purpose, because the hummingbirds went crazy for it every September. I told him I'd been trying to figure what it needed. He said it wanted less water than you'd think. She'd written that down somewhere. We found the page later. She had. Less water than you'd think. That was Loretta all the way through, precise right down to the margins. We talked about Simone that Saturday, once, for about 15 minutes, the way people talk about something that's settled but isn't over and maybe never fully will be. Marcus asked how he figured it went this far. I told him I thought the answer was the same answer. It usually comes down to the person believed I wasn't paying attention, and that belief felt comfortable enough to them that the whole plan turned real in their head before they ever accounted for what a man paying real attention actually looks like. He said, "She should have known you better than that." I told him she knew me from 20 years back. Didn't update the information since. He said that was a real foreman way of putting it. I told him it's the only way I know how to put things. The roses are doing better this year. Not what Loretta had going, not her level of knowledge, not yet, but better than they were. I've been following her notebooks close as I can, learning the things I ought to have learned while she was still around to teach me. That fence rose bloomed right on time in September, exactly like she said it would, and I stood at the kitchen window 3 or 4 mornings running and watched the hummingbirds she'd planned for show up right on schedule. She'd have been satisfied with that, not surprised, just quiet and satisfied, the way she got about things she'd planned out, careful that ended up working the way she meant them to. That's the kind of garden she built. Built it for the hummingbirds, and for September, and for whoever ended up standing at that kitchen window after she was gone. Built it, same as she built most things, not just for right now, but for after. I built my own kind of record the same way. Not for the moment I'd need it. For the moment after, when having it would decide everything that was and wasn't still possible. 31 years of a foreman's habit, put to work on the most personal thing I've ever had to put it to work on. The record's the record, and this one's mine. If this one stuck with you the way I think it might, tell me down in the comments which part hit you hardest. Hit that like button for me. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you next time.